All right, hello, you beautiful LBC people. Welcome to Catching Run-ons and Finishing Fragments. I know this is a really more of a technical workshop today, but I'm excited for it. I'm excited to dive in. So I'm going to pray and then launch us into it. Lord, thank you so much for this beautiful evening. Thank you for each student who will see this workshop. I ask that you would bless them with understanding. And Lord, help us to just be able to work through this material well, and may everything we do be to your honor and glory. Amen. Okie dokie, let's dive in. So before we can talk about either run-ons or fragments, we need to understand what a sentence is. So sentences are made up of nouns, verbs, and sometimes objects. Let's look at nouns first. So we have different categories of nouns, different kinds of things. So you may have some sort of living being, people, animal, plants. My mom, my dog Misty, a hibiscus plant, all nouns. Places, LBC, Mount Katahdin, the United States Capitol, places. Things, when we use the word things, we're usually referring to physical objects that we can grab. So at some point during this workshop, I am going to grab my water bottle. I might grab my phone to double check the time, laptop, those are all things. And then we have abstract things that we can't get our hands on. So ideas, the idea of the Trinity or Christology. And then we have emotions or feelings. Love is a noun, but it's not something that we can put our hands on, or anger, things like that. Now, nouns usually, in terms of sentence structure, whenever you're thinking about just the basic simple sentence, will occupy two spots. It'll either occupy the spot of subject, which is the actor, the person or thing that is doing something, or it'll be in the spot of the object, the which receives the action. Now, every proper sentence, every complete sentence will always have a subject, unless it's a question, but it may not always have an object. Well, I guess they may, even if it's a question, but so it may not always have an object. Now, the other part of the sentence that we always need is a verb. The verb is the action that will either just be with the subject or it will connect the subject to the object. Let's look at some examples here. So there's actually a lot of different kinds of verbs, but we don't need to, for our purposes, go through all of them. I am going to go through just a few. So first we have linking verbs. A linking verb will act as a connector point between two words. Often it'll be a subject and an object. So it might be a noun and another noun. It might be a noun and an adjective. We'll talk through some of that a little bit later. A linking verb can also help a transitive verb. A transitive verb is the next verb that we're going to look at. The linking verbs, some examples are am, is, are, was, were, and similar. We're going to practice using them in a sentence after we go through each of the basic categories of verbs that we're looking at today. The next kind of verb is a transitive verb. Now, this one is a tricky category. A transitive verb requires an object to complete itself or to complete its meaning. So whenever we think about our sentence structure, you can't just end the sentence with the verb. You have to have an object at the end. You can think about it in terms of it's passing the action from the subject to the object. Some examples: threw. So if I say, I threw, and then I just stopped, you can tell just from listening, even if you don't know anything about the parts of speech, you know that I threw sounds incomplete. You need something at the end. So I could say, I threw a ball. Similarly, caught. I caught what? You could say, I caught the ball, or you could say, I caught a cold. Whatever it is, the meaning of the sentence isn't complete until you fill in the object. I broke my ankle. I broke the window, whatever. You need some sort of object to complete it. So that's our second kind. We've covered linking, transitive, and now intransitive. Now, again, it's not so necessary that we remember the names. We just need to sort of get a feel for what a sentence can or should look like. So an intransitive verb does not require an object in order to make sense. You can just have a subject plus a verb. I stand. The dog walks. The girl smiles. Those are complete thoughts. They can stand on their own. So let's look at some samples here. These are all simple sentences. I have at the top subject plus verb plus object asterisk sometimes equals a sentence. Sometimes we just need a subject and verb. Sometimes we need subject, verb, and the object. So for a linking verb, you're always going to connect the subject with the object in a way where you could almost flip the subject and the object around and the sentence would still make sense. I am a teacher. A teacher am I. Now that's a funny way to say it, but the meaning remains the same. My dog is a Great Pyrenees. That Great Pyrenees is my dog Misty. Those students are boys. Those boys are students. It sort of works both ways. So you would need the object in each of these in order to make this a sentence. Think about transitive. So remember, transitive does require an object in order to make sense. I graded what? I graded a paper. My dog caught, remember we already talked about using caught. My dog caught what? The ball. She wishes she could catch a squirrel, but she's not quite fast enough. Those students asked what? They asked a question. Now, again, these first two categories require some kind of object at the end. Intransitive does not. I think. My dog ran. Those students slept. And so, again, we're seeing sort of this pattern where most sentences require at least a subject and a verb. Some may also require an object. So let's take a look now at all of these together. So again, you can see that pattern. Oftentimes you're going to require some kind of object in order to make that complete thought, that simple sentence, but sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're just going to have the subject plus the verb. Now, I know the title has doing run-ons first and then fragments, but in my brain, as I reflected, I said, you know what? I think that it makes a little bit more sense if we cover fragments first. So we're going to cover a couple of kinds of fragments. So let's do fragments part 1. Anytime you are missing a key part of the sentence, you're going to end up having a fragment. So for a linking verb, if you remember back, our complete thought is I am a teacher for number 1. If you get rid of the subject, am a teacher, that's a fragment. Is silly. What is silly? Who is silly? We don't know. Are inquisitive. We have lots of questions here as well. What in the world is happening? Now, if you get rid of just everything and you just have the subject and you don't have the verb or the object, I, my dog, those students, obviously we can see that, well, we don't have a complete thought. Now, with a linking verb setup, even if we have both a subject and a verb, if we don't have that object, it's actually still an incomplete sentence. I'm a what? You can hear it. Again, you don't need to know those rules of grammar. You don't need to know what kind of sentence it is necessarily in order to hear that something's missing. My dog is what? Now, unless you're in philosophy class and you're having some sort of existential debate about existence itself, that's not a complete thought. Those students are fill in the blank. We need to finish it out with an object. So these are all fragments. Let's look at some transitive fragments. Now, of course, if we just have the subject by itself, these are all built from the same sentence structure. So of course, that's another way you can mess up a transitive sentence as well. So graded a paper. Who graded a paper? Caught the ball. Who or what caught the ball? Ask the question. Again, we are also asking the questions. Who or what is doing the asking? We need a subject. Again, if you skip the verb, also doesn't make sense. Now, last category, if you remove the object, I graded a, or even if you just say, I graded, you graded what? What did you grade? The sentence doesn't make sense. Number 2, my dog caught the, you need the object. And of course, number 3, those students asked a what? Or even again, if you just abbreviate it to those students asked. What did they ask? We want to know, so you need to add that object in. Now, if you have intransitive sentences here, right? I think, subject verb. My dog ran, that's a complete sentence as well. Those students slept. So sometimes you're going to, again, need that object at the end, and sometimes you're not. So intransitive, and that it takes some time and it takes some practice to be able to distinguish. I really think about if you need an object to complete the meaning, then that's how you know that it's not this last category in transitive. Let's keep rolling. Now we're going to look at some other parts of speech, and we're going to connect it to a second portion of fragment discussion. Now, some of this information is also going to come in handy whenever we transition to talking about run-on sentences. So don't just delete this information, grab it and put it in your back pocket. So we have a whole bunch of different categories of speech. You don't necessarily, again, need to memorize what each of these are, although sometimes I do think that doing some memory work can be helpful, but it's not strictly necessary. So adjectives always describe nouns, the pretty girl, the black cat, the full bottle. So full describes bottle, pretty describes girl, and etc. So things that describe nouns are adjectives. Adverbs they can describe a whole bunch of things, a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. I typically think about adverbs in terms of describing a verb because that's just adverb, verb makes sense to my brain. So the girl ran. How? She ran quickly. Or if you wanted to add an extra adverb in there, the girl ran very quickly. So in that sentence, very describes quickly and quickly describes ran. So both very and quickly would be adverbs. Interjections, things like wow or what, things where you usually have an exclamation point at the end or interrogatives like what, question marks. Those are things that typically sort of stand on their own and they're just single words. Prepositions, we're actually going to look at a full list in just a moment, but prepositions relate one set of words to another set of words. I put the plate on the table. The on the table is a prepositional phrase. The preposition on tells us where I put the plate. Helps us sort that connection out. Coordinating and subordinating conjunctions. Again, we're going to look at a whole big long list, but they connect different words, phrases, or clauses together. Again, we're going to take a look. If you have any of these words in isolation, very technically, it would be considered fragmentary. Now, very, very technically, if you're in a context where it's acceptable to use words like wow, exclamation point, you are probably in a context where it is kind of okay to create other types of fragments. We're talking about an academic setting, so we're not going to want to use any of these words in isolation, just like we don't want to have a noun or a verb by itself either. In any case, none of these are sentences. None of these by themselves can create simple sentences. However, we can use them to create more complex sentences. We're not really going to focus on adding adjectives, adverbs, or interjections into our sentences. We are going to do a little bit of work with prepositions and coordinating, subordinating conjunctions. So let's take a look here. This is a not completely comprehensive list of prepositions, but gives you a little bit of a taste. So if I say above, above needs something at the end. It needs an object to the preposition. I raised my hand above their heads. Across. I sat across the table. After. She went to the store after me. Between. She sat between me and her friend. So these words always have an object or two or three that come after them. And so we call that, whenever you have a preposition plus the object of the preposition, a prepositional phrase. Now, if you have a prepositional phrase on its own, it's a fragment. On the table. Table is the object of the preposition on. The is describing table. There are no subjects. There are no verbs. This is an incomplete sentence. An incomplete sentence is a fragment. Under the willows. Willows is an object. Under is the preposition. So very technically, this object is the object of the preposition. And so under the willows, it's a fragment. We need a subject and a verb. Now, the third one is a little tricky because it's a little bit longer, but it's still a fragment. So we have our first preposition below. We have an article, the, which is describing waves. So we have the object of the first preposition. And then we actually have a second prepositional phrase here. Of is another preposition. The is an article describing sea. So this is another prepositional phrase. In order to fix all of these fragments, for each one, we need to add both a subject and a verb. Let's take a look. Sentence number 1, I put dinner on the table. My subject here is I. Put is the verb. Now notice for this one, I also have an object, dinner. I do need the object in order for this sentence to work. If I just said I put on the table, the sentence wouldn't make sense. That's because put is a transitive verb. I need it here in order to make sense of the phrase. So I put dinner where? On the table. Now this is a complete thought. Look at the next one here. Her brother slept under the willows. Now I have my subject, brother. Her is describing brother. Slept is my verb. Notice I do not have an object here. I just have my subject and my verb. Slept is an intransitive verb, so I don't need any object. Her brother slept where? Under the willows. Now, for both of these sentences, I put dinner. I probably would say you need something after that to make sense of it. But very technically, her brother slept could stand alone as its own sentence. The manuscript was lost below the waves of the sea. Here, my subject is manuscript. The is describing manuscript. Was lost. I have two words that are working together to make a verb phrase. Remember, was is actually a linking verb, but it's connected with another verb. And so was lost where? Below the waves of the sea. So that's a complete sentence. Let's keep rolling. Now let's take a look at some coordinating conjunctions, and we're also going to talk about subordinating conjunctions. As a professor, this is where I start to see a lot of students making mistakes. A lot of students will start their sentence with one of these words. We don't want to do that. These actually are intended to connect one sentence, one simple sentence with another simple sentence, or you can also think about them connecting things in a list. However, they wouldn't, grammatically speaking, properly start a sentence out. Now, if you're like me, you probably do. Start your sentences out with these words probably all the time. However, grammatically speaking, we don't want to do that. We want to use them in a sentence. So let's take a look at some examples. Fanboys is a good acronym to help you remember what the coordinating conjunctions are. So for each of these, I have two clauses. One is a complete sentence. The other one is a fragment because of how we've used our coordinated conjunctions. Number one, the young man took a nap and he went to the store. Well, let's identify our subjects and our verbs. Man is our subject here. Took is our verb. We need an object. What did he take? He took a nap. So this is a complete sentence. However, our second one here, he went where? To the store. So we have this part is complete, but we never want to start a sentence with the word and. It always has to be connected to something. So this is incomplete. Same thing here. Dory read the sign, subject, verb, and then we have our object with the sign. And then so they could escape. This doesn't make sense on its own. It has to be connected with the first sentence in order for the thought to be complete. It cannot stand on its own. Same thing with number 3. My doctor was young, period. Yet she was smart. The word yet can't start that second phrase. It needs to connect with the first phrase in order for it to make sense. So let's see how we can fix these here. The young man took a nap, comma, and he went to the store. So anytime we do want to connect a sentence with another sentence and we want to use a coordinating conjunction, we always want to use a comma plus that coordinating conjunction. The young man took a nap, comma, and he went to the store. Dory read the sign, comma, so they could escape. My doctor was young, comma, yet she was smart. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, couldn't I also just get rid of the words and, so, and yet, and just make those complete sentences on their own? He went to the store, they could escape, she was smart. Technically, yes, you could. However, conjunctions exist to connect meaning, so to give more meaning to what we're saying. The words, especially like so or yet, so is a causative word. It indicates that one thing led to another or was connected to it. Yet is a contrast word, so is but. And these words, again, indicate that contrast and implies that things are happening together. And so sometimes, yes, you might want to fix something by just ending one sentence and starting another sentence, but oftentimes you're going to want to use coordinating conjunctions with a comma so that your sentence conveys the meaning that you want it to. Same thing is going to be true whenever we move over to subordinating conjunctions. These are some examples of subordinating conjunctions. As, although, I use that one quite a bit because I use like my life depends on it. Since is another one that I use rather frequently along with though, until. Great words that we use all the time, but they function a little bit differently from coordinating conjunctions. So a coordinating conjunction will occur in both sort of halves of the sentence are essentially equal in importance. With a subordinating conjunction, you're telling your readers, hey, one half of the sentence is the main idea and the other half is the one that is not as important. It communicates additional information, but it's not, it can't stand by its own. I'm subordinating it to this other idea. Again, let's look at some examples here. Let's get the words in context. Let's look at some fragments. And actually, I'm going to take a sip of water. Let's roll. So I have, again, 3 sets of clauses. Some of them are complete clauses and some of them are incomplete. After the young man took a nap. What? anytime you have a subordinating conjunction, you need to connect it with an independent clause, some sort of simple sentence or complex sentence. He went to the store. That stands on its own. However, the first part does not. In order for this to make sense, we're going to have to connect these two together. Same thing with our next example. Notice that I have the first part. Dory read the sign. This is our complete thought. We have our subject, verb, and object. So that they could escape. So that is our subordinating conjunction. And this part of this clause cannot stand on its own. On our last example, although my teacher was young, you can even hear it. You can even hear it whenever I read it out loud. Again, you don't need to memorize that it's a coordinating conjunction. If you're reading something out loud and you hear whenever you get to the period that something doesn't sound complete, it's a good indicator that you might have a fragment. She was smart, that can stand on its own. So let's see how we can fix these. After the young man took a nap, comma, he went to the store. Now I'm going to read the next one and then give you another fun little grammar rule here. Dory read the sign so that they could escape. What you might notice here is that sentence number 1 has a comma, but sentence number 2 does not. And this is just one of those grammar rules that you just need to practice until it sort of sticks in your head. If you have a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of your clause, you need a comma between your first clause and your second clause, like we have in number 1 and actually in number 3. Although my doctor was young, comma, she was smart. After the young man took a nap, comma, he went to the store. Both of those need commas because our subordinating conjunction is at the front of the complex sentence. However, sentence number 2 has our subordinating conjunction in the second half. So you don't need a comma to connect our first sentence with our second clause. Why? I don't know. It's just the way that they decided the grammar rules are going to work. But that would be how you would set the sentence up. Dory read the sign so that they could escape, and this is a complete sentence. If you're feeling a little bit lost, that's okay. You're doing a great job. Remember that what we're doing is we're identifying where you have complete thoughts, and that's basically just a simple sentence. And sometimes you want to make your simple sentences more complex, either by creating complete compound sentences with our coordinating conjunctions, fanboys, or if you're creating complex sentences with subordinating conjunctions. And essentially, if you are using a coordinating conjunction or a subordinating conjunction, it's connecting two things together, and you can't just have something start with either a subordinating conjunction or a coordinating conjunction and just have that half of the clause stand on its own. As we move forward, there's another set of words that are sort of similar to subordinating conjunctions and to coordinating conjunctions, but they don't function the same way. And they're the title, the official grammar title is conjunctive adverbs. But honestly, I'm not sure if I've ever used that phrase in any of my classes. Instead, I'll use the phrase transitional phrases. And these words can actually start at the beginning of just one sentence, and you don't need to connect it to another sentence. Though you can, which we're going to do whenever we talk about run-ons. So common conjunctive adverbs are transitional phrases that I use therefore all the time. However, all the time. On the other hand, probably too much. Nevertheless, more than people commonly use the word. But there you go. You will use these words a lot whenever you're writing papers, because your professors are going to say, hey, use some transitions to help show me where you're going throughout your paper. So it's good to take these and put them in your back pocket. There are more than what I have here. This is just a sampling. So if you have some examples here, therefore, comma, the young man took a nap. This is a complete thought. I don't need to connect it to anything else because it's a conjunctive adverb and it's not a coordinating or subordinating conjunction. I actually don't need to connect it to something else. Furthermore, Dory read the sign. Meanwhile, she was smart. Each of these are fine. They're standing on their own. All right, take a deep breath because we're going to transition into run-on. So run-on sentences are whenever you have simple sentence and then you have simple sentence and you don't have sufficient punctuation to connect the two. Oftentimes you're just going to have one sentence and then it smashes straight into that second sentence. Like if you've ever been driving a car and perhaps you stopped a little bit more suddenly, or maybe there was traffic, or maybe you didn't stop suddenly and the person behind you simply wasn't really paying attention and they bump right into you. That's a run-on accident, and this also is a run-on. So look at some examples. Number one, the young man took a nap. He went to the store. Now, even whenever I read these sentences out loud, because my brain understands the rules of grammar in English, I paused a little bit where there was supposed to be some punctuation. If you aren't so practiced at reading the sentences out loud, or if you're reading something and you're not in a space where you can read things out loud, what you want to do is you want to identify where the first sentence ends and where the second one begins. So if I look at number one here, the young man here is our subject. So the young man is our subject phrase. Took is our verb. Young man took. If I say that, I'm looking at my brain. I'm saying, wait, I think there needs to be an object here. It doesn't make sense to just say the young man took. He needs to take something. Took a nap. Nap is the object of this sentence. So the young man took a nap is complete. He, oh, that looks like another subject there. Went, our verb, to the store. That's a prepositional phrase. This is another complete sentence. Same thing with our second set. Dory read the sign. They could escape. My teacher was young. She was smart. I pause at the place where naturally there should be a break, but in our sentences, there aren't any. So they are running together. They are run-on sentences. How can we fix these? Well, we actually have so many options. We have so many options to be able to connect these two things together or to fix our run-on sentences. One way you can fix our run-on sentences is by using coordinating conjunctions. And remember, if we're using coordinating conjunctions, we need a comma plus whatever the coordinating conjunction is. So for our first one, again, I added the comma and then I put the word and. Comma, and then the word so, comma, and then the word yet. So that is one way you can fix a set of run-ons, is to make it a compound sentence where you have first half equally as important as the second half. Sometimes that'll work, and sometimes it's just not going to convey what you mean to convey, and so you're going to want to use something like a subordinating conjunction. Like we said here, we're adding after, and because it's at the beginning of our clause, we need to put a comma, and then our second clause, making the entire thing a complete sentence. Number two, Dory read the sign so that they could escape, so that our subordinating conjunction, and there is no comma because we added so that to the second half, the second set of sentences. Second sentence set, whatever. And then number three, as we already reviewed, so if we're adding in a subordinating conjunction, although my doctor was young, we do need a comma because we put the subordinating conjunction although at the first half of the sentence. So although my doctor was young, she was smart. Now, some of you out there are going, wait, I feel like there are other options available to me. Is it just subordinating and coordinating conjunctions to fix run-ons? There are a couple of additional options. First of all, you could always just add periods in. So the young man took a nap, period. He went to the store, period. She read the sign, period. They could escape, period. Now, these are all options that are available. However, we don't want to sound like a Dr. Seuss book. So while in some cases you're going to be able to use periods quite effectively, actually, to be able to separate run-on sentences, sometimes you're going to want to do something a little bit more complex. Now, a final option that I want to review for you are using semicolons. Sometimes you can use them alongside transitive adverbs, which remember are just those transitional phrases. So, or conjunctive adverbs. You have the young man took a nap, he went to the store. To fix that, one way we could do that is just by adding in a semicolon. And if you compare a semicolon to a period, a semicolon is a little bit weaker than a period. So if you think about the separation between a sentence that has a period versus a semicolon, a period really says this is the end. We are almost not connected, except for the fact that it just happens to come after me. A semicolon implies a stronger relationship between two halves of a sentence. Notice that I also added one of those conjunctive adverbs or those transitional phrases. As a result, he went to the store. In my next example, I just used a semicolon. Dory read the sign. They could escape. That's correct. You can just use a semicolon to connect two halves of two sentences like that. Sometimes it's not going to make as much sense though. So you're going to want to use one of those conjunctive adverbs. My doctor was young. However, she was smart. All right. Now, buckle in. We are going to do some practice. So we have, I don't know if this is going to work here. Probably not. Okay. All right, to make this work, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the share, and then I am going to reshare my screen so that you can see this right here, and we can make some live changes. So here we go. I have a set of paragraphs here. We are starting with genre. We is our subject. Our starting is our verb phrase. With genre is a prepositional phrase, so this is complete. Why? Well, do we have a subject? No. Do we have a verb? No. Now this is an interrogative. Why? In a more informal setting, it is appropriate to have why by itself, but this is not an informal setting. This is a formal setting. So I would want to get rid of that question. Anytime you ask a question of the audience, you're breaking that fourth wall. And especially in like a formal academic setting, we don't want to be breaking the fourth wall. We want to keep a formal tone. So we are starting with genre, because identifying the genre guides us to the correct questions to ask, what questions to make, to ask / what observations to make. Genesis is primarily historical narrative. Oh man, we have all sorts of things going on here. So sometimes if you're looking at a whole bunch of words and you're overwhelmed and you say, I don't really know. I don't know where to break things up. Sometimes it might be easier to start at the end and to work your way backwards. So I'm going to start with this period and say historical narrative. It's probably an object. I have is, that's a verb, and then Genesis. Ooh, I think we have a full sentence right there. So I'm going to go ahead and add a period right here and then go back to the beginning. Because identifying the genre guides us to the correct questions to ask / what observations to make. And then I'm sort of left hanging here. Now, this whole thing is a subordinating conjunction, believe it or not. Now, if I try to connect it to this right here, Genesis is primarily historical narrative. If I say, because identifying genre guides us to the correct questions, Genesis is primarily historical narrative, well, that doesn't really make sense. So I can't connect it that way. However, I could connect it to my first sentence. We are starting with genre because identifying the genre guides us to the correct questions to ask and what observations to make. So I can lowercase this b and delete the period. Now remember, the subordinating conjunction is being added to our second sentence set. So I don't need a comma between genre and because. It's a little bit confusing, but you'll get the hang of it. Now we've already gone through this. Genesis is primarily historical narrative. That's a complete sentence. What is historical narrative? Now this is a question. However, it is set up as a complete sentence. What is our subject? Is the verb, and historical narrative functions as the object. Now, well is just a descriptive word. First, and very important, history. Now, as you read that, you may sort of get lost and say, well, I don't know what's going on there. And that's right, because this is missing both a subject and a verb. I just have an object. Now, I could also say that very technically, first and very importantly, to make it correct adverb-wise, get rid of our colon here. First and very importantly, historical narrative, as our subject, is history. And now this is a complete thought. There are many today who would support the general principles of Genesis, but would boil the content down to a nice story that functions solely to convey the principle. Now, this is long. This is a very long clause. However, it's actually grammatically correct. There are many today. This whole thing is our primary sentence structure. There functions as the subject, are is the verb. Many is the object. Who would support? This is a phrase that is describing the many, and it's connecting correctly. So who functions as the link, and then we have would support and would boil. These are two verb phrases. Anytime you have your subject doing two things, you don't need to separate them with a comma. If I said, I read a book and went to the store, I wouldn't need a comma to in between those two things. I would just say, read a book and went to the store. So this is correct. Nice story is our object of a prepositional phrase that functions solely to convey the principle. That is describing story. And so this whole thing is describing story. We're all set. As crazy as that is. Now, if I was to say, put a period here, that functions solely to convey the principle. I would need to connect it here because that is actually describing story. It's not standing on its own. So I do need to have that as part of this sentence. Let's keep moving. While I absolutely affirm that the author of Genesis wove stories together in such a way to communicate principles, I also 1000%, ooh, something sounds a little bit weird over here. I have another subject and another verb. I also 1000% affirm that the stories themselves are true. So I need to separate this from this. Now, what's going on in these two sections? This right here, I also affirm. This is a complete thought. This can stand on its own. While I affirm that the author of Genesis wove these stories together in such a way to communicate principles, this whole thing is actually dependent. It's using a subordinating conjunction, and so it can't stand on its own. I have to connect it to my independent clause. Now, the word while is starting my phrase. And so I have to use a comma to separate these two. If I was to switch the halves of the sentence around, I wouldn't need a comma. But it's set up like this, so I do need my comma. We live in a world where truth exists. That's a complete thought. It's also under attack, but it's real. Now, this is a little bit tricky because we have some contractions here. So I'm going to change these from contractions to full words. It is under attack, but it is real. It is subject verb. Under attack is a prepositional phrase. But is one of our coordinating conjunctions. So I'm on the lookout to see if I have a second subject and a verb, or if I just have a verb. But it is real. So I have another subject and another verb and another object. So I have one sentence right here, and I have a sentence right here with a coordinating conjunction in the middle. I need a comma. I'm going to put my comma after the first sentence ends. It is under attack, comma, but it is real. And God cares about reality. Now remember our rule. Can a coordinating conjunction just start a sentence? No, it cannot. We have to get rid of that word and right here. God cares about reality. That's a complete thought. It can stand on its own. But now we have the same problem in our next thought, and we do too. Now I have options here. I can either do what I did for my first fragment and get rid of the word and capitalize the W of we, or I can connect it with the prior sentence. Now, does it make sense to do that? God cares about reality, and we do too. That actually works fairly well. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to get rid of my period here and substitute a comma. Then I'm going to delete my capital A and substitute a lowercase a. And we do too. Let's keep rolling. As I mentioned, we have a fragment here, my friends. As is one of our subordinating conjunctions. It can't start a sentence and just end. It needs to depend on something else, just like with our coordinating conjunctions. Now, I would guess that you can probably connect this into the next thing. So let's go ahead and get rid of our period, put a comma, lowercase s, and let's keep rolling. As I mentioned, some scholars and theologians will poo-poo the insistence on real stories. People like oh no, I have an object right here, and then something like sounds like a separate subject phrase right here. People like Reverend Ruth Chadwick Moore assert. That's a separate sentence. I have to separate it. Now, how do I want to separate this? I'm probably going to just use a period. I don't need to make this super complicated. Now, something else I could do, though, is I could use a semicolon if I wanted to connect the sentences a little bit more strongly than with a period. Let's go ahead and do that since we haven't done it yet. And I can just add that semicolon, and I don't need to add anything. If I wanted to, it would have to be something that makes sense. So I wouldn't want to say however, because however implies contrast, but this is along the same lines. I could say something like, for example, and then I would have to put a comma. People like Reverend Ruth Chadwick Moore assert, I believe the stories of the Bible are true, even though I do not believe they are factual. Now notice I have even though, which is a subordinating conjunction. Second sentence right here. And we are not going to put a comma in here, first of all, because it's inside a quote. And secondly, because this is grammatically correct. We don't need to have a comma whenever your subordinating conjunction is in the second sentence phrase. There are lots of people, many of whom claim the name of Christ fervently. You could assert that many of whom describe people. You could also change this just to make it clearly. You could actually just get rid of this. Many people claim the name of Christ fervently. And that would also work. But again, I assert reality matters. Almost done. Let's take a look at just a couple more sentences here. To illustrate the point. Now this is tricky because we have a preposition, to, then we actually have a verb, to illustrate the point. This doesn't work. We need a subject instead of a preposition. So you could say something like, I will illustrate the point. I've added a subject and I added a linking verb to be a helping verb to help us in this sentence. On one of his podcasts. On is a preposition. One is a noun, so it's either subject or an object, probably a subject here. Of is another preposition. Podcast is an object. We don't have any verbs, and so we know that these are just prepositional phrases. Oh no. So a prepositional phrase can't stand on its own. We need to connect it to somewhere or something. Fortunately, we have a sentence right here. Chip Ingram shared a little story to help make a point about the importance of encouragement. That's a complete thought. So I can go ahead and connect these prepositional phrases to this sentence. On one of his podcasts, Chip Ingram shared a little story to help make a point about the importance of encouragement. Now it's a complete thought. The problem with this story. I have a subject, the problem, and a prepositional phrase, but no verbs. So I would need to add in either just a subject somewhere, or I would need to rework this set of phrases to make it a sentence. I'm going to change the beginning and say there is a problem with this story and make it a sentence. So you see, sometimes making your changes isn't going to be easy. It's going to be a little bit complicated and take a little bit of time. While we can grasp the truth, Chip is seeking to point out the story rings hollow. Now, while is another one we've already identified as a subordinating conjunction. So we know that we need to add a comma somewhere. Let's see if we can hear where the phrase ends. While we can grasp the truth, Chip is seeking to point out. There's where we need to add our comma. If you weren't sure, we can see the story rings hollow, and that is another simple sentence. So you can identify the subject, story, rings is our verb, and hollow is our object. The story rings hollow because we know, as Chip himself indicates, it is not real. Now, even though this is complex, this is actually a complete sentence. Because is in our subordinating conjunction here. So we don't need a comma to separate these two. As Chip himself indicates, is separated off by commas. And then we have a complete sentence right here. Last sentence, set of sentences. The story's power is limited because it is not grounded in reality. This is actually also a complete sentence. The story's power is limited because it is not grounded, because it's our subordinating conjunction, and we don't need it to connect the first half with the second half. Hopefully this has been a helpful walk with you guys through your through commas and subordinating conjunctions and coordinating conjunctions, finding those fragments and catching those run-ons and putting it all together so that we have complete sentences. You can be on the lookout for our other workshops. We have some great ones coming up, including some for MLA and APA. If you need the Ally Center for anything, please visit us at tutor@lbc.edu, and we would be happy to get you set up with either one-on-one appointments or maybe to get into one of our small groups. for study groups. And of course, you can always be on the lookout for our future workshops. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.